Hello, and welcome to the lore of Braunhaven. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about the Rok-Skull Orcs and their major encampment known as Kharazug. So, the Rok-Skull Orcs are a major threat to the Braunhaven region. Um, Mostly because they have been going unchecked, and they tend to perform raids from time to time, and at other times the Glaucian Empire has hired them as mercenaries for their campaigns against the Stygians on their northwestern border along the Frosthelm Sea. Uh, to greater or lesser effect, but mostly the reason why they're hired is simply because of their numbers. Um, and of course, to the Emperor, uh, they're expendable. And so when he needs to throw large amounts of troops at the Stygians, he will hire Rok-Skull Orcs, not caring whether or not they come back. The Orcs are nomadic in nature, and they don't really have a capital city. But if they did, the Kharazug would be what they would consider their leadership. Now, the Rok-Skull are not a single war tribe or a single tribe. They are actually a conglomeration of multiple war bands, and Kharazug really started with the war band under the leadership of Gruul the Dwarf Smasher. And uh, these other war bands kind of glommed onto him because, believe it or not, Gruul actually has been a fairly good leader, even beyond orc standards. Now, Rok-Skull Orcs, or Orcs in general, are definitely an older style look. They are the pig-snouted orcs that you would see from older editions of D&D. They are almost always chaotic. If you're not going to run into a good orc. Orcs are, if you run into an orc, they are going to try to kill you. Possibly, if you're lucky, well, maybe if you're lucky, they'll kill you. Otherwise, they're going to enslave you, capture you, and enslave you. And if you're, unfortunately, if you're a female, they will use you as breeding stock, and that's how we get half orcs. Sorry, but that's the truth. So the Rok-Skull Orcs being led by Gruul, Gruul Dwarf Smasher. So orcs have a very terrible life. They're the young, the whelps are basically taught to fight and kill one another because over food, over something as simple as food, or one orc wants to play with something that another orc has, and so the whelps are, if you want that, you have to kill that other orc and take it. If it's yours, you kill them and you take it, and that's just the way of life, and it's a very rough life. And Gruul started as many whelps do, and he made his way up to his young adolescent years, in which he then, of course, was brought into the warband. And most whelps at that age in a warband aren't going to survive either. But Gruul kind of beat the odds, and his warband was hired as mercenaries by the Glaucian Empire. And he saw several campaigns on the northwestern banks of the Stygian Sea, and or I'm sorry, on the northwestern banks of the Frosthelm Sea against the Stygians. And it was during this time that Gruul, watching the human legions, really learned the benefits of maintaining one's equipment, and so he emulated that and taught that to the rest of his war band, and of course um, that probably at first didn't go over very well, and he was probably told to piss off whelp and things of that nature. But reality is that the people that told him to piss off died. And those orcs were no longer with us, probably because of failing weaponry or dull blades or what have you. And so, knowing that he was surviving because of this, the other orcs in that warband would start to pay attention because evidently Gruul knew something that the others did not. And so he saw many many campaigns with the Glaucian Empire, and he learned quite a bit about tactics, and he watched some. I mean, not that the legions in the north are going to do a whole lot of diplomacy, but what little that they did do, he learned from that as well, and so he brought that back with him when the campaigns were over. And it was at one point during his campaigns in the north that he earned the nickname Dwarf Smasher because a cadre of dwarves had attempted to come and rout the forces, and he was known to have killed several of them, thus earning him the nickname Dwarf Smasher. He is now older and, of course, wiser for his experiences, and he really has become something of a statesman among the orcs. Not that I wouldn't say that he's absolutely genius, but he's at the top of the rung when it comes to intelligence with orcs. And he has actual dreams of creating a empire of an orcish empire. He's not sure what that's going to look like in the end, but so far he has rallied the other war bands under the Rok-Skull Orc tribe's banner. And so this is Kharazug, and the thing about Kharazug is that he doesn't Gruul and the Rok-Skull Orcs do not take any account for trying to hide the fact that Kharazug exists. They don't. It's not really camouflaged. It is sitting on the western banks of the Great River, and at night, many times if you were on the Great River, you can see the fires from Kharazug. Probably not all the way across on the eastern bank of the river, but definitely if you are on a boat or a barge, you're going to see them. And they have kind of dug in and fortified this area. And on the east side of Kharazug, of course, you have the foothills and the beginning of cliffs for the Skelos Mountains, and then of course the Great River on the west side. And the orcs have placed archers and spearmen and with javelins and all of that, and have watchtowers. So trying to raid Kharazug from the river is not going to be it's not going to be very easy. And of course, there's enough of them, and the terrain is difficult enough that you know, heading in from land, coming in from the southern reaches, and trying to get into Kharazug that way is going to be problematic too. And the orcs are very good at using their terrain to their benefit. And so they are dug in like a tick, and they are not hiding. They pretty much just yell, "Here we are! Come do something about it." Now, Kharazug is actually placed very near an old dwarven mine called Khatum, and Khatum mine is actually run by the Slipnese goblin tribes, and we'll get into Khatum and how that whole situation came about. But Gruul has kind of set up a very good diplomatic stance with the Slipnese goblins, and in a lot of cases, he has recognized that the goblins know how to do things that the orcs aren't necessarily very good at doing, and a lot of that takes place underground. So he will hire Slipnese goblins as sappers for some of his more daring raids, where he will have the goblin tribes dig underneath a target and have his orcs slip in that way, so that he can come up either right in the middle of of a town, or come up on the other side and flank them, and so that he's got forces coming from two directions. He's really a very good tactician, and he's got a very good grip on strategy. The Slipkney's goblins also give him access to trade routes into the underworld, and so um, this allows him to trade a lot of the stuff that he has stolen from trade caravans or made off with from towns, and he's able to sell those to the Slipkneys, including the capture of many slaves. Those that, if he's got what he needs for Kharazug, as far as um, slaves and breeding stock, he will sell excess to the Slipkney's goblins that will then sell them throughout the Underdark. Sometimes they get sold to uh, the Duergar in Felsencleft, or occasionally, if there is a need, they'll get sold to the Drow. So there is this large slave trade going directly from Kharazug to the underworld via the Slipkney's goblin tribes of Khatum. The encampment as a whole, like I said, they don't have a capital city or a central leader, but if there was to be one, Kharazug right now would be considered it. And they don't have a central leader, but most of the warband chiefs do defer to Gruul. And so if there's a time of need or crisis, they all gather, and they actually have a council and discuss what is needed for the tribe. And Gruul sits at the center of this and kind of has the overriding veto on any one course of action. If there's one that he feels isn't going to be very good, he will just say, no, we're not doing that. Or if there is dissension and nobody can make a decision, Gruul can, of course, say, well, this is what we're going to do, and come up with a course. As I said, they are a major danger. And a lot of times there have been a couple of human and demi-human raids that have gone into Kharazug. Mostly this happens if they're not going in to try to eradicate them. They are going in to try to rescue somebody that's been enslaved. Generally, of course, this is going to be somebody who is probably fairly important. And those raids have met with mixed success. No raid has ever really been very successful when it comes from the river. That's been tried multiple times and almost always ends in failure. And the usual outcome, of course, is that nobody comes back from this raid. The Rok-Skull just either kill and enslave them more, or and that's it. Nobody really knows what happens to them because nobody's dumb enough to follow them and try to figure out. So there have been a couple of times, though, where there have been successes of rescuing somebody from the slave pens and making it out. Usually the group that does that is going to take heavy losses. The orcs are just very good at using this position to their advantage. Now, during the fall through spring months, the ground around Kharazug is usually fairly marshy. This land is very low, and so the water table, I wouldn't say that it's below the water level of the river, but it's almost even. So it is very marshy during the fall through spring months. For a few months out of the summer, though, it does dry out enough that it actually the ground is dry enough that you could consider it hard and solid. But the rest of the time, it's a marshy mess. Um, and of course, at a few points in the winter months, they do get snow and ice. But not. It's usually just rain. It's very wet fall through spring. And this, of course, assists the orcs. The orcs are kind of built for that kind of environment, whereas humans are going to have difficult time. And of course, carts and wagons are going to have difficulty getting through that kind of terrain. So it just doesn't play out very well for them. They do have Gruul has maintained that good relationship with Emperor Belusian Cestus, and the Rok-Skull orc tribes do hire out as mercenary bands for the Galassian Empire. Uh, so this is, of course, another aside from their raids and slave trading. This, of course, is another source of income for Kharazug, and has made the Rok-Skull orcs fairly prosperous. They're making fairly good money. Now, Gruul does have a right hand man, or in this case, a right hand woman. In her name is Mazog, and Mazog is a shaman, and she's very well versed in ritualistic druidic magic, and she seldom leaves Gruul's side. And her biggest benefit to Gruul is her ability at divination. And so she always keeps a leather pouch full of bones, usually human finger and rib bones, that are carved with orcish runes. And she has a 2 in 6 chance of divining a course of action that she can give to Gruul. And he has found this very useful. Now she's a oddity among the orcs. She actually practices a form of druidic magic towards the old goddess Garrosh, who is basically the patron god of orcs and goblinoids of all kinds. And Garrosh is always depicted as this extremely obese goblin. Obese maybe isn't the right word. Bloated is the correct term. She is bloated with open sores and pussy wounds, and but clearly of a goblinoid type. You couldn't say which race she's of goblinoids she's from. Some orcs claim that she's an orc, and hobgoblins claim that she's a hobgoblin. But everybody knows who she is, and and Mazog practices druidic magic dedicated to Garrosh. Now, only women are allowed to practice this magic, as the belief of their, I guess you could call it a religion. The belief of their cult is that women have a stronger connection to the bloated goddess. And during the training that you would take to learn to be a druidess shaman of Garrosh, it's very harsh. And of the females that are chosen in any particular goblinoid tribe, very few. If you pick 10, you might end up with 2 that are going to be that are going to actually survive and make it to be a shaman. So the whole pervasiveness of the might makes right, and only the strong survive, goes through all of their entire culture, and this is completely the same in their religions. The Rok-Skull orcs of course, will raid towns and villages. Sometimes they will cross the Great River in canoes, or they will ride across. Sometimes the Barbarous Trade Bridge, and they have done raids directly into the town of Braunhaven. And when the humans and demi-humans fight back, and they send a raiding party over, especially if they are successful. But even if the orcs kill them all, Gruul takes this as a sign that, maybe he poked the hornet's nest too much, and then the raids will die down for a few months, and the orcs will kind of lay low, let the heat settle down, and then after a few months, when he feels that things have kind of blown over, he will then go back to raiding caravans, back to raiding towns and villages. And so there's never-ending cycle, and nobody's really been able to do much of anything about it. And nobody has really bothered to try even a diplomatic stance. Nobody's gone in and said to Gruul, "Hey, can we come to an agreement?" And if you know, Emperor Belution Cestus, of course, knows about this. And if he is going, if there is some sense that he's going to do something about it or put a stop to it, he's really made no outward sign. He doesn't seem to care one way or another. As long as the Rok-Skulls continue to exist and he can continue to use them as mercenaries, he's perfectly fine with their existence and what they're doing. So that is the Rok-Skull Orcs of Kharazug. On Tuesday next week, we will talk about Khatum Mine and the Slipknees Goblins. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next week.